Hostile Environment, Understanding and Responding to Anti-Christian Bias. He's been writing about racial identity. He's been writing about racial biases and about bias in the academy and also in the arts and the media. The arts and the media. Well, I thought it was arts too. Oh, just media. Okay. Just the media. But he's been writing about that for some time. And he has been making a contribution. He is well known in the academy. Here's the other one. I mean, the title of this just gets me. So many Christians, so few lions. Have you heard that before? That's not Aslan on there, by the way, folks. That's not Aslan. Those are the lions that face down Christians in the Colosseum. And there are people today that truly, truly lament that Christians are no longer sort of rounded up and thrown to the lions. That's what those T-shirts mean. That's what those bumper stickers mean. I've even seen it on a onesie. Imagine. A onesie. A kid, 1-year-old, wearing so many Christians, so few lions. So we're entering into, and we have been in a time of real tension, and we are called to be Christians, to be light and salt in that kind of environment, that kind of world. So how do we do that? How do we go about it? One way is to duck our heads and sort of hope it blows over. But we don't think that's probably the best way. We think there are probably better ways to do it. And it's our joy tonight to hear from somebody who is a professor of social sciences at Baylor, green and gold, but also a graduate of the University of Texas in Austin in sociology. So you're a mixed bag. And we are grateful that you are here to be with us. Would you give a warm Texas welcome and a Houston welcome to our guest, Dr. George Yancey.
Thank you all very much for having me here, and I really appreciate it. Let me just ask, especially y'all, some of y'all are a little bit older, I see some young whippersnappers here. Have you felt our society is shifting over the past couple of decades in ways that, seem powerless to really understand or stop? I think I'm going to touch on that tonight. I'm going to touch on that and what's happening. The name of this talk is Anti-Christian Bigotry in the Academy and How to Fight It. Please don't tell those people who send those nasty emails my email address, because I don't need the grief. But it's very true. Now, I'm going to spend most of the talk on the evidence of anti-Christian bigotry in the academy, and then the last 10 or 15 minutes, how to fight it. The reason why is I think we have to understand the problem. We understand it very well, not just for ourselves, but for others. Because when you say there's anti-Christian bigotry or discrimination, people go, oh, you Christians, you are overrepresented in politics, you're overrepresented in this, you don't have any problems. And there's some truth to that as far as political field, but there are very real issues. And so I hope to provide evidence that's quite convincing, and also for us to fully understand this problem, because this is a problem to solve as a community. It's not a problem that I can solve or you can solve. We as a community have to solve this problem, have to work with this problem. It's not just for ourselves, but for our society, for science. And I'm going to make the argument that the anti-Christian bigotry is not just bad for us, it is bad for us, but it's also bad just for knowing truth, for knowing science. And so that's going to be what I'm going to argue. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with methodologies for one study. I'm going to refer to some of those research I've done. And if you want, and the books you can look up in, if there's questions on how I did the methods, I'd be happy to take them afterwards or in the reception or anything like that. But I'm going to really focus in on looking at the data and help us to get a good general understanding of where we're at. So, with that, I want to start. Okay, I want to start by, instead of just looking at anti-Christian attitudes in the academy, I want to start by looking at anti-Christian attitudes in general. So let's start very big, and then let's narrow down to the academy. So to do this, there's a survey that asks what's called a thermometer question. So in 0 to 100, you rank the groups on how much you like or dislike them. So as you all know, I'm from Baylor and Texas. So if Oklahoma Sooners was there, it'd be 0. And of course, Baylor and Texas would be at that 100 spot. Baylor because they're paying my paycheck. and Texas is where I came from. So how much do you like a group? Now they asked about, I think about 30 or 40 groups, I forget, I didn't look at the exact number. And what I did was I averaged the rankings for each respondent, and then I wanted to see if a respondent ranked a group a standard deviation below the mean. Because to me, that indicates that you don't like that group. You may rank them an 80, but if everyone else is ranked a 90, then that says something about them relative to the other groups. So no matter where you ranked, I wasn't looking at where you ranked, I was looking at did you rank them below everyone else? If you did, then I said you had a disaffinity to that group. Not an affinity, a disaffinity to that group. All right? And so I want to just, like I said, there's about 30 or 40 groups. I want to looking at some religious and racial groups, and you'll see why I'll look at racial groups here in a second. But here's the breakdown. This is from 2016. Now, the group that had the highest disaffinity were the atheists. Almost half of the Americans ranked them a standard deviation below the mean. The second highest group, though, was Christian fundamentalists. They were very close to Muslims. Have you heard about Islamophobia? Well, Christianophobia is actually a little bit more stronger than Islamophobia. And in fact, if you look at the 2020 data, the disparity has increased. There's been a real drop in the anti-Muslim animosity and not in the animosity of Christian fundamentalists. And now, look at the racial categories. So I'm a race scholar, so you're not going to hear me say that race doesn't matter or that we don't have problems with race. We do. But the sort of open animosity has been stigmatized. It's a different problem than anti-religious bigotry. People are more openly anti-religious in their bigotry than they are when it comes to racial issues. So this is not when people say, well, there's no problems, people are exaggerating the way people feel. Well, the evidence says, no, that's not true. But these are numbers. What's behind the numbers? At the same time, this is why I'm using the 2016 data, at the same time, we sent a survey out, open-ended questions and we got nearly 4,000 responses. There were organizations that, as part of their mission, was to fight Christians or fight the religious right or something like that. And so I got a ton of responses. I'm gonna show you about 5 responses. They're about representative. I'm not showing you the worst responses or the best responses. They're more representative. If you want the worst responses, you can pick up the book, So Many Christians, So Few Lions, and then you can read them. And don't say I didn't warn you about that. What are some of the stereotypical images that are there? Their goal is to turn America, they're talking about Christians, their goal is to turn America into a theocracy. Christian, of course. I've heard it said that nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance or conscientious stupidity. Their dangers remind me very much of the brown shirts, straight out of Nazi Germany. Narrow-minded, bigoted, racist people like to convert our country to a theocracy. Their agenda seems to include making America a theocracy, which frightens me as it would take us back to the Dark Ages, politically, culturally, educationally, and morally. Hateful, bigoted, a danger to our republic, the rights of others, and to democracy. Now, once again, these are representative comments. These are not the worst comments. These are pretty representative. But there's some themes that come out. Now, this is not exhaustive, but some themes come out in this. One of the things I think you can see is the notion that Christians are stupid. They're going to take us back educationally, the conscious stupidity. Christians are stupid. Another theme you can see coming out there is Christians are intolerant or bigoted. Narrow-minded, bigoted. You can see the sort of Nazi Germany type of references. And then another stereotype you can see coming out there is Christians want to take over society and convert it into theology. Not theology, theocracy. We can see theocracy is mentioned several times. There are other stereotypes, and I'm not even sure these are the most common stereotypes, but they're quite common. So what's behind those numbers? That 1/3 of the country that rank Christians a standard deviation below everyone else, the notion that Christians can't quickly think, that they're stupid, the notions that we're intolerant, the notions that we want to take over and create a theocracy. Okay, so that tells us something about the ideas of how people are thinking about Christians, people who have animosity towards Christians. One final thing I want to look at this data is I want to compare people who have what I would call Christianophobia to Christians themselves. In fact, I'm going to look at Christians who believe the Bible is the Word of God. So I'm looking at conservative Christians, because when we're talking about Christianophobia, we're really talking about conservative Christians that faces this sort of animosity. So let's look at this. So the first column is Christians who believe the Bible is the Word of God. The second is hostile to Christians. These are people who rank them a standard deviation below the mean. And then all respondents as a control group. And so you can see that those who are hostile to Christians are more likely to be male than Christians and other respondents, more likely to be white than Christians and other respondents. They're more likely to have a bachelor's degree. They're more highly educated than Christians and other respondents. And they're more likely to make more than $100,000 a year, wealthier. Male, white, wealthy, highly educated. In the social sciences, this is a group that we clearly see as privileged. This is a powerful group in society. I mean, how many times you hear straight white male, rich white male? Well, there they are. They're the group that are hostile towards Christians. Now, of course, this isn't true for all white, male, highly educated, highly incomed individuals. And I'm sorry, but the last row somehow got cut off. After I tested, I messed up. But you see on the fifth line, they're likely to be politically liberal. And in the last line, they are less likely to go to church. So we have a powerful group, white, male, highly educated, wealthy. They're politically liberal, and they're irreligious. Okay, so what does this describe? What this describes are individuals who have control of the cultural institutions in our society. Media, more likely to be white and male and educated and wealthy and progressive and irreligious. Entertainment, the arts, and this describes academia. Academia is more likely to be white, male, obviously educated. Hard for me to say wealthy, being a professor, but we do better than the average, right? Progressive and irreligious. Anti-Christian bigotry in academia is reflective of anti-Christian bigotry in general. You could say it's just a variation of the anti-Christian bigotry in general. So given that now, let's look at academics. I wrote a book called Compromise in Scholarship, and the key measure in this book was this question. I sent this question out to academics in 9 different disciplines. Now, I'm not going to read the question, you can read it yourself, but basically what the question is asking is, if you're told about this group, will this make you more or less willing to hire people from this group? Now, some of these things are things you're not supposed to know, and when I wrote this book, I think I wrote this book about 2011. When I wrote this book, you may not have found these things out. Today, with the internet, you're more likely to find these things out. Now, what I asked about political ideology, I asked about religion, I asked about sexual preferences, I asked about lifestyle, I asked about a lot of different categories, about 26 different categories. I'm only going to look at the ones concerning religion and politics. The reason why is I went into this research with a hypothesis. My hypothesis is that there's going to be bias. And the bias is going to be strongest against political conservatives. And my reasoning was quite simple. I had friends who were Christian sociologists. I had no friends who were Republican sociologists. So I figured, there's probably going to be some religious bias, but the strongest bias is going to be against political conservatives. Now, don't tell my wife, but I was wrong. Let's look at all academics. So you can see damages means that if they find this out about this person, it damages their willingness to hire them. Sometimes slightly, moderately, or greatly. So I'm just throwing it all together, but it does damage. On the other side, it enhances it. And you can read up there, the fundamentalists, evangelicals, NRA members, Republicans, Muslims, atheists. Now, you can see for all academics, almost half say that if I find out you're a fundamentalist, I'm less likely to hire you. About 40% say that for evangelicals. Now, what you may be thinking is, well, it's bad for evangelicals, but at least I'm not a fundamentalist. I can tell you that in another research I did, I asked academics how to define fundamentalists, And a good percentage of them define fundamentalists this way. You believe the Bible is the Word of God. So what you think you are and what they think you are could be two different things. As you can see, I was wrong. The NRA members is pretty high, but the Republicans, while there is bias, is not as strong as bias against conservative Protestants. Atheists, actually, if you want to go for a job in academia, tell them you're an atheist. That's going to help you a little bit more than hurt you. Mirzami, a speaker we had, was in English, and she had a hard time. We can now see why. Actually, I think these bars are higher. It's just they got caught up at 50%. But both evangelicals and fundamentalists, more than 50%, damage your ability to be hired. Among English academics, they find out about you. So we can see just how powerful that bias is in English. Chemists isn't quite as bad. It's not quite as high. And what I found is in the hard sciences, it wasn't as stringent, but we can still see that if the chemists find out if you're a fundamentalist or evangelical or an RA member, less likely to hire you greatly. And by the way, most of us academics already know this, but the way you get hired is there's a committee of other academics. So this is not the academics may not want you, but the dean's going to hire you anyways. A dean will not hire someone that the committee says, no, we don't want that person. Historians, you can see, again, the same sort of pattern. And go ahead and look at sociologists, my tribe, and the same pattern. So, those attitudes of anti-Christian bigotry results in attitudes of willingness to discriminate. Because it is technically illegal to discriminate someone if you're at a state school based on their religion, and yet we see about half the academics are willing to discriminate based on religion. Now, I'm only looking at hiring decisions. Maybe in other decisions, academics are more, shall we say, tolerant. Maybe it's just that hiring, that at that point in time. And this is the only study I'm going to look at that's not my own. It's by Inbar and Lanier. I actually met Inbar a couple months ago, and he's not a believer, but he gets it. He sees the problem, which is a reminder that not all academics share this sort of bias. And so, I would love to work with him on a project one day. What they do is they look at social and personality psychologists. So I looked at 9 different disciplines. They only looking at one. But their advantage is they look at not just hiring decisions, but whether or not we'll accept a paper for review, whether or not you will accept a grant for reviewing a grant, symposium, and hiring decisions. And the question they ask is, if you find out someone is a political conservative, or that if it's in a paper, that the paper sort of has a theme that favors political conservatism, would you discriminate against it, or a grant? So here we see, they not only ask about the response about themselves, but think of a social desirability effect about the colleagues. So would your colleagues discriminate? And as you can see, that when it comes to having a paper reviewed, 1/3 of the colleagues would say, yes, I'm less likely to, I want to discriminate against a paper if I know it's from a political conservative, or it has a finding that supports political conservatives in some way. Grant review, about the same thing. If you want, you can do some research with little money, but a lot of times to do really good research, you need some money. Symposium hire, same thing. And the hiring decision is about where you expect it for a social science. Now, all this is about political conservatives, right? And you're saying, well, you may be in there saying, I'm a Christian, I'm not political conservative. But remember what we just found out. There's more discrimination against conservative Protestants than political conservatives. I think if they had asked about conservative Protestants, these numbers would be higher. Now, I can't absolutely say that for certain, but since we know that was a tendency in all the disciplines I looked at, why would it not be that way? So these numbers are probably higher if a paper comes across that seems favorable in some way to conservative Protestants, or if someone's applying for a grant that's favorable in some way to conservative Protestants. Okay, so I did research a few years ago where I wanted to just personally survey academics. And I'll tell you a little bit about this one. Surveyed 4,500, sent it out, got 10% response rate. Not as great, but unfortunately it's becoming more the norm. Those are the breakdowns. We had the respondents rank religious groups on 0 to 100 scale, how much they liked, kind of like the thermometer. And then we asked the respondents open-ended questions about fundamentalists, evangelicals, and mainline Protestants. So here's what we found. First, as no surprise, fundamentalists and evangelicals are ranked lower than the other groups. They were the only groups that are ranked below 50. So 0 to 100, on average, people had more animosity towards these groups than positive feelings. Now, why is this? We also asked an interesting question. We asked a question about their social networks. In other words, we asked about all the religious groups, what percentage of each religious group is in their social networks at 15 and today. So I divided into Christians and non-Christians. So you can see at the age of 15, for about half of all the respondents had 0 evangelicals in their social networks. Today, about half says 0 evangelicals in social networks. And the scores for fundamentalists are around the same percentages. Christians, it's the percentage that says 0 is lower, and you may be thinking if they're Christians, how could they not have any evangelicals fundamentalists in social networks? A lot of the Christians were mainline Christians. In fact, there are more mainline Christians than conservative Protestants. And one of the reasons why, some of you may know, I wrote a book looking at conservative and progressive Christians. This data sort of inspired me to write that book, because what I found is a lot of the mainline Protestants are just as hostile towards conservative Protestants as the non-Christians. And so that accounts for a lot of the findings concerning Christians. But think about it. Your average academic, if you have 2 academics who are not Christians sitting before you, chances are one of those 2 has no friends who's evangelical or no friends who's fundamentalist. Now, the real value of the study, though, was those open-ended questions. Because there, I could see why why the academics rank conservative Christians so low. There are certain stereotypes: irrational, stupid. A belief system based on resistance to logic, information, and intolerance of others. They're totally irrational and often filled with hatred towards anyone who doesn't share their views, sort of like a Christian Al-Qaeda. The belief in biblical literalism results in irrational, anti-science viewpoints. So one of the reasons why, and this also explains why that certain academics don't want to hire conservative Christians. If they believe that conservative Christians are irrational, stupid, you wouldn't want that as your professor, right? By the way, about 40 to 45% of the academics gave hostile answers when asked about the conservative process, which kind of matches a little bit of the percentages in the study from Compromising Scholarship. Intolerant. Extremely hypocritical, intolerant, and biased against disadvantaged people in the United States. Extremely conservative and intolerant of other social choices, preoccupied with sex and sexual outcomes. Their opinions often seem extremist, and they often appear intolerant of other people's ideas. They do not seem to want to engage critically with important questions. They can sometimes be disruptive and intolerant on the campus, especially in the settings of religious diversity. I've also seen them proselytize in the cafeteria and other gathering places. So intolerance is another reason why 40 to 45% of the academics don't want to be around conservative Christians. Want to take over society. Live in the Bible Belt, where fundamentalist Protestants have placed an egregious constitutional amendment on our May 11th election primary ballot to further ban gay marriage and all domestic legal unions, not between a man and a woman. I am enraged at their attempt to build a literalist conservative theocracy. They ruin the Protestant country or replace their free society with a theocracy. So, the stereotypes we saw before, we looked at all people with anti-Christian attitudes. Irrationality, stupidity, intolerance, theocracy taking over. Same sort of stereotypes academics have. This gives us a sense of what we run into, what drives some of the hostility. People who have these beliefs, these stereotypes, you know, if there was hope to think, well, they're well educated, maybe they won't stereotype others. I hate to bust your bubble, but that is just simply not true. What is the cost of this? So I want to look at the cost of this by looking at as a research question and looking at how that question may be shaped by anti-Christian bigotry. Shaped not only in a way that harms Christians, but shaped in a way that gives us a distorted information about what society is like and inhibits our ability to solve a problem. So this problem is polarization. Do you all feel this society is very polarized? I know I do. I mean, you may be saying, yeah, I hate them, but then you know it's polarized, right? Why is it polarized? Well, you can talk about red and the blue, right? That there's a lot of polarization, and there's a lot of politics behind the polarization. I'm going to racialize this a little bit, and you're going to see why in a few minutes. But one way to think about it is, maybe the red we can think about sort of like, you know, since we're talking about Christians, white evangelicals, you know, or white fundamentalists. But we have to represent the other side. And how do we represent the other side? You know, who would be against that? Well, we just looked, and we saw that whites, highly education, you know, progressives. So let's talk about white conservative Christians and white progressive, highly educated individuals. And you may say, well, you know, wouldn't some people of color fit into these? And yeah, there would. And I think that we could treat them that way, but I think that's the way that a lot of the dialogue tends to go along. And so why are we polarizing with these two groups? Well, are they politically active? Because a lot of our polarization comes through our political combating, right? So are these groups politically active? So look at the 2020 American National Elections Study. They asked several questions about political activity, and I was able to divide it into white conservative Christians and white educated progressives. And you can see on every measure on political activity, white educated progressives are more politically active than white conservative Christians. Sometimes not by much, you know, like attending a political rally, that's only about one percentage point, but then look at give money to political parties, contact federal officials, you know, white educated progressives consistently are more politically active. You may have heard about the political activity of white evangelicals. Do you know that when you look at a ranking of political activity of all different religious groups, white evangelicals are really kind of about in the middle. They're not super low, but they're really not super high. You know, there's a lot of, you know, atheists are about the highest, and white educated progressives, if they were put in as a group, they would rank very high too. So if political division is driving us, the white educated progressives are more politically active than the white conservative Christians. This is not to say that the white conservative Christians are not politically active and that they may not be carrying some of the problems. But the problem is political action, political activism. White educated progressives are engaging in it more so. Now, if you point that out, what people will say is, well, it's because that the white conservative Christians, they're more intolerant, they're more authoritarian, they want to take away people's rights, whereas white educated progressives, they just want to help people out and help those who are disadvantaged. Now, I have to admit, it's hard to study that, and I'll tell you why. Questions that look at the authoritarianism of white educated progressives are not well designed. The content, you know, they're not contextualized to really examine them. I looked through surveys to find questions that satisfy me. You asked about someone who's a racist, should you support him or not? That's not a really good question for a variety of different reasons to sort of discriminate between authoritarianism with white educated progressives. So I had to go to a study that I did in a book called Dehumanizing Christians. I didn't actually put this chart I'm about to put up in that book, but the data comes from there. Because there I asked a question that's really contextualized to examine the attitudes of progressives in ways that other questions are not. So once again, I want to look now at authoritarianism. Who's willing to take away whose rights? And so I asked a series of questions about whether or not people are willing to take away the rights or to outlaw certain activities that are currently legal. And if they indicated any willingness, even slightly, then I put them as willing to outlaw. All right, so here we go. Here I had to use white born-again Protestants because of the way I asked the question, and then white educated progressives. So percent supporting outlawing abortion protesters. And as you can see, white educated progressives are more willing to do that. Percent support outlawing preaching against same-sex marriage. Once again, white educated progressives are more willing to do that than white born-again Protestants. Percent supporting outlawing communist activists. Here, white born-again Protestants are more willing to do that. So there's authoritarian both ways. There is authoritarianism both ways. And then percent support outlawing various religious cults. That's an interesting one because I can think of reasons why that the white educated progressives would not like religious cults, because they're religious, and white born-again Protestants would not like religious cults because, they're not Protestant. And it's about the same. If anything, the white educated progressives are a little bit more authoritarian on that question. Now, this sample is not a probability sample, and one of the reasons why I've not published with it is because it's not a probability sample. But I do have some confidence that authoritarianism is an issue among white educated progressives. I will not say it is more of an issue among them than white born-again Protestants, but it is an issue. So we have two groups. We have the white conservative Christians and the white educated progressives. And, both groups are politically active, but the progressives are more politically active. Both groups have authoritarianism. So if we want to look at this as a source of polarization, then we need to know about both groups. And indeed, since 2020, there's been several academic books that have had critical approach with the political activity of white conservative Christians. As you can see in these books as I put them up here. I'll admit, there's at least one book out there that I think is totally garbage. But some of these books are quite good. Some of the points they make are quite valid, and it's something that a white conservative Christian should take into consideration. Our political activity, how it may feed into polarization. There's been a lot of effort put towards looking at this. I know, and I looked at this up about 6 months ago. There may be more books since then. And this is only since 2020, by the way. There may be more books since then. And I do know at least one of the authors up there was on Twitter talking about how the author got invited to apply for 3 different grants, each worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you're invited to apply for 3 grants and you don't get any of them, you're a horrible academic. And this person's not horrible, so he's probably going to get at least a couple of them. So probably going to do another book. So we have the books, and I think we have some understanding on the role white conservative Christians play in this polarization. So that's good. So let's look at the books now about critical of white progressives since 2020. And that's the books critical of the political activity of white progressives since 2020. There are no books out there. Now, you may think you're exaggerating. You didn't look anything up. You just put a blank sheet and you think you're cute. Well, let me tell you something. Earlier this year, I published an article on the political attitudes of white progressives, especially how they tie their attitudes on racial issues to their attitudes on conservative Christians. I have another article coming out later on this year that's a variation of that. To do those articles, what I have to do, I have to do a literature review. I looked up for books that looked at the political activity of white progressives. If someone has one, please let me know, because I need it for my research. Those books do not exist. And think about why they don't exist. Because the answer given polarization is the problem is conservative Christians. The bias in our academia tells us what questions we can ask and what the answers are going to be. If the answer is white conservative Christians, why would we look at white progressives? Why would we look at progressives at all? And if you want to do research on that, good luck getting a grant. You just saw the evidence on, if you get a grant that doesn't comport to the storyline, which is the problem is white conservative Christians. My problem is not that there are critiques of white conservative Christians or conservative Christians. I'll throw myself in there. That's not my problem. We should be open to learning. My problem is there's no attempt to even moderately critique progressives in the polarization of our society. What does that do? That gives this image that the problem of polarization is entirely the fault of conservative Christians. One can admit that conservative Christians have done things to generate some of this polarization, but it's not entirely the fault. I can think of a lot of examples of polarization, dehumanization, authoritarian attitudes among progressives. But in academia, you don't see that evidence. This is not just bad for us as Christians. This is also bad for, if we want to solve the problem of polarization, and you decide that the problem is only on one side, and you put all your efforts on one side, what happens? The other side gets a pass, and it gets freedom to do whatever they want to do. And it makes things worse. So this deteriorates our ability to understand our social reality. This is bad for science, as well as being bad for Christians. This is just one academic question. You can think of other academic questions where this anti-Christian bigotry has impacted science, creating bad science, as well as a hostile attitude towards Christians. Okay, so this is the problem we have to tackle as a community. And we should tackle it not just for ourselves, and there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, this is bad, we shouldn't be treated this way, but also because science needs it. We need to be able to tackle this and deal with this. And so I want to start thinking about this. And so one of the answers, obviously, is all those academics who don't have Christians as friends, or even their social networks, because it's easy to stereotype people when we don't know anything about them. That becomes very easy, stereotype people. We don't know anything about them. I don't have any friends. They must be stupid. A lot harder when that person's in your social network. So we need more Christians. And so to get more Christians, we have to, in academia, we need more Christians in graduate school and beyond. And so I've been thinking about this because I've done some, I've worked with graduate students, Christian graduate students, worked with the ministry of Christian graduate students, thought about my needs as a Christian graduate student. So what do we need for successful Christian graduate students? Well, first thing the student needs is the ability to do high quality work. We have to demand excellence. It should not be a dodge saying, well, they don't like me because I'm a Christian, so I can do, shoddy work. We have to, those of us who are in academia, come to the program and work under me in sociology, I need to demand excellence from you. I tell you what, it is true what some people say, that being a Christian and trying to publish any sort of paper that doesn't follow the paradigm that Christians are bad, they're irrational, they're stupid, they're intolerant, they want to take over, try to publish that, you have to be better. You have to be better. You're going to be called down the carpet a lot more easily. Some of the stuff that I've read, that one book, for example, there's no way a book like that could be published, critical of white progressives and highly educated progressives. Just no way. The one bad book I told you about. Even some of the other books, I think, would have a hard time because of the way that they were done, but I won't go into that for right now. Social and spiritual support. These students need support. They need our social support, our churches to support them, not to run them down, to find places for them, ministries for them, because when I was in graduate school, a ministry for the undergraduate students was not the best ministry for me. What people tend to do is say, hey, you're a graduate student, why don't you head up our undergraduate ministry? No, I had needs myself. And so we need the spiritual support, mentorship, people to go to talk through the issues, to figure out solutions. There's going to have to be some financial support. Now, there's some financial resources that are available to everyone, no matter what, but if you want to study Christian nationalism, there's a pot of money waiting for you. And if you're a student who wants to study that, you can get some tuition help with that. But if you want to study educated white progressives, there ain't no money out there for that. So if we want things studied, we have to find, there are some things you can study without a lot of money. There's some things that you really can't. So that's just the reality. And that person has to have sufficient character to be willing to be in the minority, because you will be in the minority. That's just the reality of it. You have to have a sort of a tough skin. I think one of the things that prepared me for going in academia was I used to be a official at intramural ball games. So I developed a kind of tough skin because, I get called everything, and I decide when I'm just going to throw that flag and give them the 15-yard penalty. But I mean, seriously, you have to Sometimes they can't take it personally. And that's true in academia in general, but you really have to be if you're going to be a Christian in there. So as we think about trying to put Christians in academia and how we're going to help Christian students, these are some of the things that they need. Some of it themselves. Some you have to be called to it. If you're not called to it as a Christian, you shouldn't do it. But if you want to be in the minority and you can do high quality work and you're called to this, then it's something you have to think about. All right, so let's just talk about fighting anti-Christian bigotry in general. All right, so here's my ideas. And once again, I'm one person. We as a community must think about how we can move forward on this, all right? So I'm just giving you some ideas I have, and then we can think about it. Because I think this is a community, and the community is very important. A Christian community, we need a community in a post-Christian world. First, we're going to have to defend free speech no matter who, all right? We heard a great presentation yesterday by Josh Dunn about an initiative on how to bring viewpoint diversity to the University of Tennessee. That's the way. You know what's not the way? What's happening in Florida and Texas right now. I hope I'm not stepping on toes, but outlawing DEI in universities, when you do that, you set up the mechanism by which your viewpoint can be outlawed. If our viewpoints is true and the best, then we can go in and can compete with others. We don't have to take them out. But if we start doing that, we set it up where we can be taken out, and then we don't have the chance to compete with others. We must engage in free speech. Now, you may be saying, well, maybe you like DEI. Actually, I've been very critical of DEI. I've been very critical of anti-racism. I've been working on trying to develop a Christian approach towards dealing with racial issues, because I think there's a Christian approach in doing that. So we can use our Christian faith to have a better approach. We need to concentrate on that and being included and trying to bring in different viewpoints, rather than trying to exclude others. They're going to exclude others. That's what they do then. We do us, they do them. And we'll fight against being excluded, but we should not seek to exclude other viewpoints. Avoid relying on poor academic work. I can't tell you what it's like to be academic, and here's a pastor cite research that I know about badly, or describe some sort of sociological phenomenon totally off. We Christians have to, look, you don't have to do the sort of in-depth literature review that academics do, but you got to do some work. And it would be good if we Christian academics have a role to play, even as just a resource. Because if you put sloppy work out there and then people see it's sloppy work, then they denigrate the rest of the thing you're doing, everything else you're doing. So what we have to do is shoot for high quality work. And our Christian professors, our Christian academics have to do high quality work. Let me just say that I feel that impacting the culture is at least as important, from my point of view, more important, but I'll just go with at least as right now, as political activism. I know we're in an election season. There's going to be all sorts of election funny business, all sorts of passion and feelings and trying to support this candidate or that candidate. And I'm not saying to not engage in politics, okay? But if that's all we do, we've lost. Because your culture is going to eventually trump your politics. And if we don't have an impact on the culture, and we put all our resources toward the politics, and we don't put resources towards not just academia, but the arts and entertainment, and not just segregated off Christian arts and Christian entertainment and Christian media, but going into the mainstream, if we don't do that, then you can win political victories in the short term. Long term, you're going to lose. We've got to impact the culture. We've got to think about how we can impact the culture. We need to strengthen our Christian culture in a post-Christian world. In this post-Christian world, if we all maintain our Christian values, we need a strong Christian culture, all right? We need to build our own communities. We may not always be able to impact things outside of our culture. But I'll tell you what, if we build a strong community, there's a lot of people out there who are looking for a community. I think those research I read were one-fourth of all men did not have a single friend or something like that. There's an astonishingly high number, I may be off on that, of people who don't have a single friend. So we can be a Christian culture that can attract others, but still, we have to find a culture and find our place in that Christian culture in a post-Christian world. Christians in academia need social support to play the role we need for them for. Look, I'm not saying that Christian academics need to run everything, because Lord knows we can mess up with plenty of stuff, but we do have a role to play. Other Christian have other roles to play, Christian business people, Christian arts, Christian clergy, Christian workers. We have a role to play. We're not going to do everything, but we can be a valuable service. And often if you just ask us, we will. Sometimes we're busy, but if you often just ask us, we will be a valuable service. But if you don't ask us and we're not supported, then we're going to have fewer Christian academics, and that role we can play is going to get lost. I suggest that our attitude should be getting a seat at the table. There's talk about let's take the society back for God. I think that's a mistake. Remember, people already think we want a theocracy. So we're talking about taking the society back for God, and they're thinking, okay, here come the Crusades. All right? Now you can say that that's not fair, but that is reality. Rather, we should fight for a seat at the table. And the thing about this is, fighting for this, when we argue that, hey, we're Americans too, why don't we get a seat at the table? That's a hard argument to refute. You're arguing we need to take the country back for God. People can say, well, who are you? What about the non-Christians? What about these people? What about that people? When you take it back, you're going to get rid of them. If our ideas are the best, then we can get a seat at the table and we can push them. But if we're trying to take the country back for God, then people are going to resist us. Look, I think there's a lot of things we have to offer. I think a lot of things have gone wrong in society that we can correct. Identity politics. I just published a paper late last year on how identity politics is correlated with lower levels of mental well-being. Now, I don't know whether or not it's identity politics itself or people are drawn to that, but there's a problem there. There's ways you can do research to look at that. I've not had a chance to really look at that. But there's something wrong with identity politics. Either it's drawing people who have lower levels of mental well-being, or it's helping to create that. We can bring that to the table if we have a seat at the table. If we're excluded, then work like that gets excluded. But we have to have a place in which we can say, look, we have a better way than using your personal identity to make sense of the world. Maybe you use an identity that's greater than yourself. Efforts to support Christian academics at all stages of development are crucial to get that seat at the table. We need to support our Christian graduate students. We need to support our early career academics, mid-career, late career, because they're not going to get that support from the mainstream of academia. And many of them can be successful without a lot of support, but they can be even more successful with that support. And that's going to get us that place where we can have more of a voice, because we can have respected individuals speaking into our culture who are Christians and come at it with a Christian worldview. Okay, just some conclusions and implications just to touch on. Christians have some political power, but we lack cultural power. Academia, media, entertainment in the United States. So sometimes when people say, oh, you Christians have all this political power, and there's some truth to that, but then when it comes to cultural power, there's no doubt about it. I have done a little bit of research on the media and how it can warp some of the biases. I've not done work on the entertainment or the arts, but we know at the very least that Christians are underrepresented in these areas. So we are underrepresented when it comes to cultural power, and that's where there's a lot of Christianophobia. Academics have the demographic one expects of Christianophobes. The demographics just match, and then we saw evidence that they actually have that problem. And academics are largely siloed away from conservative Christians. Don't have conservative Christians in their social networks. Anti-Christian bias impacts what academic questions are asked and how they are answered. What is the solution towards race relations? Well, we need a vigorous anti-racism. Well, all the data on anti-racism or diversity training, well, most of the data, I won't say all, most of the data shows that this doesn't work. But that's the answer, so we have to keep trying to figure out ways, rather than what I would say a more collaborative conversation Christian approach. What's the problem with polarization? Christians are the problem with polarization. That's the question, and that's the answer you're supposed to have. So the bias shapes how the questions are asked and what answers you're allowed to give. Anti-Christian bias weakens science, as I think I showed, that it distorts our ability to answer scientific questions. Efforts to support Christian academics are important in creating a Christian culture in a post-Christian society. Academics have a role to play in our Christian culture. And maybe we need to figure out what that role is. But it has a role, an intellectual role that has to be played for in a post-Christian society. And working together, we can maintain a thriving Christian community in a post-Christian world, and we can outlast Christianophobes. I think there's reasons why we can outlast them. I think, if you look at birth rates, if you look at what's happening in our larger society, the alienation, that if we can maintain our thriving Christian community, it may be something that I don't see in my lifetime, maybe it happens in my kids' lifetime, in my grandkids' lifetime, but we can keep thriving, but we have to maintain that Christian community. And academics is a way in which we can do that. With that, I thank you all for your time and attention, and I look forward to questions.
Would you consider Dave Rubin's two books, Don't Burn This Book and Don't Burn This Country, as critiques of progressive liberals in the United States?
I've not heard of those books, so I don't know.
Okay, so possibly?
I need to read them.
Right.
I need to see it.
Look at those in your research.
What's it called again?
I dropped it. Oh, here it is. Don't Burn This Book and Don't Burn This Country.
Is the person an academic?
I don't know if it's done in an academic.
Yeah, I was talking about academics.
Okay, you're talking about academics.
I was talking about academics. Yeah, you might find them.
You might find them among a
because
popular.
there are activists who will write about them,
Okay.
but I'm talking about academics. Yes.
Okay. So here's a question I thought was a good one. Hopefully, if I can find it among all these other great questions. When you were going through your work, how did, as a sociologist, how did your work sort of come up against, and how was it considered your worldview, particularly against critical theory?
All right, so
Your work in sociology,
yeah,
but your particular worldview, as you were approaching that, as
Sure.
your professors understood.
well, I'll just tell you about my worldview as far as critical theory and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
I think critical theory actually has value in looking at some of the problems in our society. Now, I think that it brings to light things that we might not have seen. The problem with critical theory is I don't think it offers useful answers. So, if I would, as a personal level, would I read critical theory to maybe see some insight to a problem I hadn't quite seen before? I think it could be valuable in doing that, but I would not use it as a source to answer those problems. I would look at a different way of answering those problems.
Okay, so maybe it's a better way of looking at those questions.
I think it's a better diagnostic tool, yes.
So why don't you write a book that's being critical of political activity of white progressives?
Why don't I write the book?
Why don't you write the book?
Okay, fair question. That book needs to be a good book, okay? Because you can imagine the attacks that book's going to get. I've done a couple of articles, so I have some quantitative data from secondary sources. To write that book, I would also need to have some sort of qualitative data, some interviews, because to interpret that quantitative data, if I don't have that, then people can interpret the quantitative data in different ways. It would also be ideal if I was able to have a primary probability sample in order to do that. So, yes, I thought about writing that book, but I will not write a book that's halfway there because it's almost worse than nothing. Now, I'd rather write a good book and then take the slings and arrows than write a halfway book, and then people will say, well, Well, you can interpret this way. You don't have any qualitative work. Well, I have to admit that then. So yeah, I'm willing to write the book. And I know that there's not a lot of people who be willing to write the book. I think I'm in the best position to write the book, but I have to have the right sort of data before I'm willing to write the book.
If you were to write that book, could you find anybody to publish it?
I've gotten books published. Yes, that book will get published if I write it the way I will approach it. I don't know. I'll get Oxford University Press, but I'll get a good, decent good, decent academic publisher. Yes, I will.
Okay.
And my history speaks for itself. I mean, maybe I'll go to New York University Press, or I just got a book from Templeton, so I'll go back to some editors and see if they want it. If they don't, then I'll shop it around. I'll get it published. Yeah.
Get it published. Somebody writes, I'm starting my PhD this fall. What advice do you have for a Christian going into academia? How do you live out your faith and not risk losing grants, promotions, opportunities?
Okay, so spiritually, find a good Christian church and people who will support you. From an academic point of view, I will tell you, and I told the group earlier today, before I got tenure, people knew I was a Christian, but they didn't know a lot more about me. I think that there is wisdom in as we were saying today, not flying the Jolly Rogers as soon as you can. So that'd be my approach. I would also say be excellent in your work. Don't take shortcuts. Learn the literature. Learn the methodology. Make sure you do high quality work. Learn how to apply your worldview to doing high quality work in a way that's acceptable. And I know that they could be done, but that can be tough. But learn how to do that. And so when I wanted to study multiracial churches, about 20 years ago, I didn't study about the beauty, God's beauty in these churches. I talked about contact hypothesis and how we're going to test that and how we're going to look at that. And then I got books and articles published on multiracial churches. So you have to learn how to sort of tweak things in the paradigm of your field so that they can be acceptable and yet accomplish the goals that you want to do. And you can be more open about it after you get tenure. So that's my suggestion.
So you've got to do better work than everybody else, basically.
You might have to. I'll tell you,
the best student.
If you publish something that's against the paradigm of the field, it's usually better than the average article, because it has to be to get through the reviewers. Because reviewers, I'll just give you an example. I don't know why this was so controversial, but I was working on an anti-racism scale to measure how anti-racist individuals are. I went through about 4 or 5 different articles because people found everything wrong. I look at other scales, and this is a little bit inside baseball, so I apologize. I just realized when I started this. I look at other scales, and they have Cronbach Alpha, and they say, you were good. And I had to do confirmation. I had to do confirmation factor analysis. I had to do qualitative work. I had to look at the Verimax and Promax rotations. I had to do a lot of extra work for other people who just threw together a scale, did one measure, and said that's good, because I think this scale, because those other scales were measuring conservatives, and this measures progressives. So I think that's why I had to do extra work for that. And it took me about 4 or 5 articles to finally get it through.
And there are some of the organizations that are here that'll be the kinds of support that you would need in college, grad school kind of things. What about the STEM fields? What does it look like in STEM fields? STEM fields is not as hostile as the social and humanities. And I think one of the reasons why, and this has been theorized by others, so this is not my own idea. I think one of the reasons why is the STEM fields feel less threatened. So if we want to understand, say, social morality, well, chemistry doesn't tell you a whole lot about that. But religion and anthropology or sociology or things of that nature, even philosophy, they're competing for similar questions. And so I think there's less hostility. The exception, I think, is on issues where religion
intersects. And so something like evolution would be something where you might find more hostility. But generally speaking, while there is hostility in the STEM fields, it's less so.
Rather than focusing upon fighting anti-Christian bias and sort of using the language of culture war and fighting and that kind of thing and enemies, would it be more Christ-like to focus on being a faithful witness who's known for loving enemies with humility and kindness?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a struggle that we Christians have, and we should be practicing about that. I mean, I don't think it's an either-or type thing. You know, I think it's wrong. I think Islamophobia is wrong. You know, when I see Islamophobia, I think anti-Semitism is wrong. I think bias against Christians is wrong. It's all wrong. We're all humans. We should not be discriminated against. I don't think Christians have to say, well, I'm a Christian, therefore it's okay to discriminate against me. But we can do that and still love people. Now, it means that we have to check our attitudes sometimes, because I know it gets frustrating. But yeah, I think it's a both and. I don't think it's an either-or type deal.
So should we abandon the language of culture war and enemies?
Yeah, we may want to look at our language. Yes, I mean, yeah, you know, I don't like to call people enemies. You know, maybe they're opponents, maybe they disagree with me. I don't want to call, because that sets them off as people to be defeated.
Sounds like very polarizing, right?
Yeah.
The DEI bureaucracies by nature preclude white male evangelical Christians from having a seat at the table, so eliminating them in places like Florida and Texas from administration rather than classroom. Is that not the right thing to do? Should we just eliminate it altogether since they already demonstrate?
I don't think it's right for the state government to do it. I mean, I would have no problems if University of Texas Austin said, we don't want DEI, bureaucracy. We, as a college, decide not to do that. I would not write them and say, no, you got to keep that, because I'm critical of the DEI. But when the state government does that, a one-size-fits-all type of thing, because DEI can mean different things. So there could be some DEI programs that are using some principles that actually work, but they're eliminated too. So I don't like the state government doing that. Yeah.
So rather than the government doing it, having it done in another.
I think we can see a table, we do better work, we show a better way, and then ideally people will start eliminating on their own.
So you think Christians can win, Christian conservatives can win the battle of ideas, if you will, getting away from bad life.
If we have the better ideas and we have an even playing field, then yes, we can. And I'm not saying that we always have an even playing field, but if we have the better ideas, yeah. Are there things we could learn, though, from others, too? See, that's part of it, is maybe we have some oversights that we can learn as well.
Right.
But overall, you know, I think conservative Christians, I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about theology, because I'm a conservative Christian in that way. Yeah, I think that is overall the better approach. So I think that overall that would win more likely than lose if we had a level playing field.
Is it easier to be black in the academy or Christian?
Black. I actually had a columnist write an article on some of my work on bias, and I told him, you know what? In academia, I face a lot more discrimination for being a Christian than being black. Outside academia, it's reverse, but inside academia, that's what I face, and he put that quote in there. So I have to say black, or else I'm going to find that out and say I'm a liar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so yeah, I don't want to be a liar.
So how do we go about looking at and finding this data that you're talking about?
At what?
This data that you've given and shown the charts and things. Where can we find this data?
Okay, in several different books.
Okay.
The Compromising Scholarship book has the data concerning enhancer or damages being hired. The quotes and the thermometer studies is in the quotes on Christianophobia in general. That's in the So Many Christians, So Few Lions book. And then some of the data came from articles. I don't have I can look up the articles. If someone wants to email me for the articles on the when I was showing the quotations from academics, I'm trying to think. I think it was how academics view conservative Protestants, but I can look up the exact article and I can get that to people if they want to look
and do those reference, your books, do they reference peer-reviewed articles then as well?
I mean, I cite peer-reviewed articles, yeah.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Yeah. when you talk about, well, what are your definitions of evangelical, fundamental, conservative? Because many followers of Jesus don't see themselves as evangelical, fundamental, or conservative.
Yeah. Well, the thing is...
That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's not, my definition isn't important. The definition of the academics is what's important. So how academics define it is going to be important. And so we actually asked the academics in that one survey about how they define evangelicals, fundamentalists, and mainliners. Now, they don't define it all exactly the same. What I'm saying is that, that for a good chunk of them, they define fundamentalist as someone who has a literalist interpretation of the scriptures. They find evangelicals, a good chunk of them, not all of them, they find evangelicals as people who go out and proselytize. So you may say, well, I'm an independent Christian, I'm not evangelical fundamentalist. If you think the Bible is the literal word of God, and you go out and proselytize, you're an evangelical fundamentalist in their eyes. And so how I define it is irrelevant to the effects that are out there.
Okay. So these definitions aren't your definitions.
No.
They are the definitions of the people answering the surveys.
Correct.
Okay. And those definitions, how are they set, you think? Are they set by just popular ideas, or are they set by media outlets, or what?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. I think that, our culture, this is why culture is so powerful. Culture tells us what we believe to be true. And so the culture of the academics has told them, here's how you define evangelicals, here's how you define fundamentalists, here's how you define mainliners. And so in some ways, they're reiterating the culture that they have. It's not a perfect thing, it's not a one-to-one thing. Obviously, there's some variations in how they define it, but our culture tells us a lot of ways of what we believe to be true, what we believe to be right.
How do we maintain strong Christian community while developing non-Christian relationships? How do we balance that out?
Yeah, so, we obviously need to have non-Christian relationships. What I would say is that probably your primary relationships are going to be people in the Christian community. Your closest friends, it can be in a Christian community. But that doesn't mean that you can't have friends or even do things with people who are not Christians. In fact, we should in order to reach out to them. And so to me, that's another both and type of situation where, maybe at work or at school or something like that, we develop these friendships. But our primary relationships, probably for our sake, probably to help build the community, need to be with other believers. And it doesn't mean it have to be at your church either. Maybe if someone goes to a different church or is part of a different denomination or things of that nature. I think that the Christian community I define kind of broadly, not just your church.
What advice would you have for parents who are sending their sons and daughters off to college this fall?
Well, here's the thing. I think that the danger of sending your kids to college is less than you think. I'll tell you why. Professors have incentive not to anger your kids. Now, you may not think why, because the kid comes home to you and says, such and such, so-and-so is really mean to Christians. And then you call the administrator or you call the state school, your congressperson, and it does get back to us at some point. And so a lot of times, the pressures of professors, professors are to be kind of somewhat equal in the undergraduate class. Now, it's different for graduate students. Very different for graduate students, but undergraduate students, there's like, all right, this person's in my class for a few months, I'll give them the grade and they'll be gone. And actually what studies have shown is that when you look at the adults at the age of 25, those who went to college are more likely to be members of churches than those who didn't go to college. So I do think that the notion that sending our undergraduates to college is going to threaten their faith is overblown. I think it's different for graduate students. I've seen too many graduate students who go on to graduate school and then start deconstructing their faith and became a non-Christian. I think that happens too often. I think there's a different dynamic with graduate students. But undergraduate students, I wouldn't worry about as much. However, what I will say is encourage your kid to get involved with the Christian church or ministry, be involved with the Christian community. Do the best you can. Of course, they're adults, so they can do what they want to do. Try to see if they'll get involved with a church or a ministry when they go to college. And I think that is one of the best ways to help sort of protect them, because then they're with other students who are facing the same problems, same struggles, and there's a community there, and so that would be very valuable. And like you said, there are some very valuable representation of ministries that would be help out. I mean, I would say ministry or church. I mean, some people say, well, it has to be a church. I think a parachurch ministry can be fine for this. Eventually you want them to be in a church later on in life, but just to get through college, if they go with Rochelle Christie or something like that, they'll get the support that they need.
Would you join me in thanking our speaker tonight, George Yancey?